Okay, guys, welcome back. We are in our second session now, and in this session, we're going to be starting a new project. So we're going to go file new live set, which is probably the most exciting part of music production. It's a feeling that never goes away, starting from a blank slate. The options are limitless. Yeah, I really love that feeling. Okay. So in this session, we're going to dive a little deeper into synthesis. We're going to start learning about the ADSR envelope, and we're going to write a whole new song. And by the end of the song, we're going to have used that envelope so much that hopefully you have a solid grasp of what it's doing and how you can use it to shape sounds. And really just improve the way you write music instead of just only relying on pre-made presets. Okay, I'm just going to make this full screen. Okay, so for this session, I think it might be fun to write a more kind of like melodic techno or progressive kind of track. The genre lines are a little bit blurred on this one. Basically a track where we have a rolling bass line. It's a little darker and yeah, kind of like leaning towards, the more like Afterlife style stuff. Afterlife is a label if you haven't heard of it. We're not going to go full Afterlife because the sound design there is a lot more complex, but yeah, it's the sort of mood we're going for. Okay, so we're going to start off with our MIDI channel here. And the first thing we're going to write here is a bass line. So let's first set our tempo. We're going to set it, I think, let's go for 124 on this one. And as I said before, hopefully you've written a few songs at this point and now you're more comfortable with the hotkeys. So I'm not going to be talking you through all the hotkeys every time I do them. So yeah, on a MIDI channel, we're going to make a new MIDI clip. And then we're going to be making a bass line. So we're going to be doing a rolling bass line, which is a bass line that typically consists of 16th notes really quickly in a row. So basically, let's first put down those 16th notes. And I think we should use maybe A minor for this, which is, again, it's all the white notes, just like we did in our last song where we use C major, except this time the scale starts from A and walks up to A again. So the whole mood of this changes, even though we're using white notes. The act of treating A as kind of your home changes the context of all of those notes and makes it feel like a darker, more melancholic scale. Right, so this is 16th notes, and we just placed 4 16th notes. And let's just duplicate those all the way across this section. I think this is a 8-bar section. It's a 4-bar section. Right, and then we're going to want to make a sound for this. Right, so before we start making a sound, I'm going to open up a synthesizer called Serum because it makes it a lot easier for me to illustrate what an envelope is and why it matters, and just to kind of wrap your head around envelopes. So let me just go grab Serum here. Okay, so we're having a look at a synthesizer now. So synthesizer basically is a piece of software, in this case, sometimes hardware, that will generate a waveform, and then typically we can shape that waveform using things like filters and envelopes. And you've already heard what a filter sounds like. We've been using auto filter a lot, but just in case you still aren't sure about that, I'll turn on this low pass filter and show you how it sounds. But let's just hear what this sounds like if I just play it. So this is just a saw wave, and it's playing those 16th notes, and it doesn't sound very nice. Let's hear what a filter sounds like. I'm going to take this cutoff filter. The cutoff over here is the frequency of the point where you see this curve, and here is the name of the filter. This is a Moog low pass filter. It says low, and anytime you see this shape, that's a low pass, and that's just going to be filtering out high frequencies. So listen as I drag this down how that sounds. Okay, so that's what a filter sounds like. Now I'm going to start introducing a envelope. So here you see it says ENV1, that's our envelope 1, and we can use this to change the shape of the sound. So at the moment it's a very sustained sound. If I just hold down a note to my keyboard with this armed, it just plays one single long note. But we can change the shape of that sound using this envelope. An envelope is basically, think of it like a volume shape. So we have a few stages on an envelope. We have the attack. You can ignore this hold, because hold is not a typical parameter to have on most synths. Typically we just have attack, decay, sustain, and release. Now attack is the initial button press. How long it takes for the sound to go from 0 up to its maximum volume. That's the attack. So if I push now, the attack is at 0.4 milliseconds. So it takes 0.4 milliseconds for the sound to reach its maximum volume. It's pretty much instant. I can lengthen this attack. Let's make it 1 second. So now you can hear the sound takes a long time to fade in. And that little ball that slides up represents basically the sound going up in volume. And this is why I'm using Serum here, because we can visualize this really easily. Okay, so the next thing that happens after this attack stage, so this line here is called your attack, is that it goes through the decay stage. The decay is the amount of time it takes for the sound to go from the volume that it is at this point to the volume that it is at. And now, because the volume is the same at both points, you won't hear any difference in the decay. I'm just going to bring this down so that this goes a bit quicker. So it just stays the same volume, and the decay has no effect on the sound. But if we bring down this point, this is called the sustain, this little point here. If I turn that down, now the decay will have an effect. So now if we adjust the decay, let's make it really fast. It takes 168 milliseconds for the volume to go from its maximum down to the sustained volume of minus 14 dB. If I make the sustain 0, the sound completely disappears. And if I make the decay really long, it takes a long time for that sound to completely disappear. Okay, so these are the main parameters we're going to be focusing on: the attack, decay, and sustain. Now, release is another parameter, and that happens after the sustain stage. Release happens whenever you release your finger from playing a note, or in the case of looking at MIDI here, whenever a note ends. So if we're just dealing with one single note here, if I play that note, as soon as it ends, the sound cuts off immediately. But if I add some release to it, let's add a 1 second release. You hear it takes 1 second for that release to fade out completely. So release is great for making things sound a bit more natural. You know, if you think about like a guitar, for example, if you pluck the string, the sound doesn't just immediately disappear. It kind of rings out for a while. And if you want to have that effect, this is where you'd be using release. Decay can also sound like that, but the problem with decay is that if I play a note and it cuts off before that decay stage is over, it'll just immediately end with a 0 release. So again, just to gloss over that, attack is the amount of time it takes for a note to reach its maximum volume. In this case, it's at 0, it's going to be instant. Decay is the amount of time it takes for the note, for the sound to reach the sustain level. In this case, the sustain is at 0. And so if I bring this decay down really short, we get a very short, plucky sound. And release is the amount of time the note will decay for after the note is released. Now we're not hearing any release because the decay was so short and the sustain's at 0, the sound reached 0 before the note was released. But if I bring that sustain up to like -12, you can hear that release come through. So I suggest sitting and playing with parameters like this on whichever synth you're using to really just get a feel for how that sounds. But we're going to switch over to a non-visual synth now, because I want everybody to be able to follow along who's using Ableton. So we're going to use an Ableton synth. And then we're going to shape our sound and create a nice rolling bass line with it. Okay, so let's go into our instruments. And I think a good synth to use for this is Wavetable. It's probably the closest thing to Serum that we're going to get. Okay, so now that we've opened up Wavetable, you'll see on the left here, we have a bunch of different waveforms that we can choose between, and we can slide between them by using this slider here. And these are your basic waveforms. You get a square wave, and I'll just play them all so you can hear different sounds. I always think of square waves, they sound like Game Boy sounds, like 8-bit kind of very hollow, playful sounds. But they are still very powerful and are used a lot in more like hi-fi dance music. So don't discount them just because I said the word Game Boy. Then you go down to a saw wave. That's the sound we were just using, and this is like a more gritty kind of sound, and it's probably the most commonly used waveform in dance music. Then we go down to a triangle wave, and this always kind of reminds me of a flute, especially if we add some white noise in with it. And just to show you how that would sound, if I add some noise here, it starts to sound quite flute-like. You can ignore that for now though. And then we get a sine wave, which is just a pure tone. It's also a good idea to visually see what these look like. So a sine wave just consists of a single harmonic. That's why it sounds so clean and simple, often quite pleasant. The triangle just has a few more harmonics on it. So these additional little spiky boys over here, those are the harmonics. And as we go up to our saw wave, we see a lot more harmonics. It's a very harmonically rich waveform. And because it's so rich in harmonics, It's probably the most useful waveform for shaping and filtering, because whenever you're filtering something with so many harmonics, it's kind of like starting with a huge block of clay. You just have so much you can carve away and shape and get so custom with it. Saw waves are really great for sound design. And notice as I shift up to the square wave, every other harmonic is going to disappear. And we get back to the square wave, the more hollow sound. Okay, so for this session, we're going to shift back down to the saw wave. And we're going to stick to just the saw wave for this session. And now we've got our filter like I showed you inside Serum. And sweep that down. And here we have our amp envelope, which is controlling the volume of the synth. There's our attack, our decay, our sustain, and our release. Alright, so for this sound, we want a nice, short, plucky sound. So we want an instant attack almost. 1 millisecond is fine. But we want a lower sustain. Let's bring it all the way down to, let's bring it actually down to about minus 20 dB. Now it's getting more plucky. I think I want it even more plucky. Let's bring that decay down to like 400 milliseconds maybe, or 300. Even 200 sounds good. We can play with that release too. Now you can hear the note, the sound quality changes as I bring up the release. And that's because the sounds are running over each other, and kind of what we're hearing is something called phasing. Don't worry too much about that right now. I don't think it's a good time to explain phasing. We'll go over that later on. But just know that anytime you have phasing in a synth, you can get rid of that phasing sound by making the synth mono. Mono means you can only play one note at a time. And we can click on this button here to switch it to mono. And then increasing the release, we don't hear any difference until we get to that last note. We'll hear that release ring out. There we go. Okay, so we've shaped the sound pretty much. But for it to be a bass line, we don't need it to be up here. We need it to be down in the sub-frequencies. So let's pitch that down an octave. Here we can control our octaves by using this transpose. This is a global transpose, which will pitch down everything. You'll see there's two oscillators. We can actually have two waveforms running at the same time, and we can have them at different octaves. So that's why there's a semitone over here where you can control the transpose, and here you can also control the transpose. Here's the global transpose. And if you haven't heard the word transpose yet, transpose simply means to move a note up or down, like this. I'm busy transposing this from A to A sharp, or transposing it down to A flat. And so now I want to transpose down an octave, which is 12 semitones, if you remember that. So let's just type -12 here. And what does that sound like? It's getting a little more bassy. I want that to be down one more octave, so let's go to -24. Okay, now that's getting nice and bassy. Let's filter this down a bit. Okay, so now that the sound is kind of got its general shape, I'm happy with it. I think it's another good time now to introduce using an envelope as a modulation source. So up until now, we've been using this envelope simply to shape the volume of the sound. So the volume of the sound is changing over time. You remember the volume is going up to its maximum in 1 millisecond. Then the volume drops down to minus 20 dB. And then it releases, and it takes 788 milliseconds to go to 0 dB. But we can use this shape not only to control the volume, but to control the filter. And luckily we have multiple envelopes, because we can use them for different things. So here we can use the second envelope to control the position of this frequency knob rather than the volume of the synth. And how we do that is we simply click on this frequency here, and what the goal is for this to be jumping up and down really fast. I want to hear that filter moving. At the rate of those 16th notes really fast, and it needs to happen automatically at the exact parameters that I set on this envelope. So here we can go into this matrix, and that will let us map the filter to envelope 2. And how we do that is we simply make sure you've clicked on this, otherwise that lane might not appear. It might not say filter 1 frequency. And we just simply map filter to envelope 2 by dragging this up. And that amount will dictate how much this filter is going to open up according to the envelope. So let's just turn it up to its maximum 100. And let's bring the frequency all the way down to 0. And now this filter is going to jump up to its maximum, which is 100%. And then it's going to move down to 50%, which is going to be halfway. And it's happening so fast that we struggle to see it happening. But as I reduce the amount here, you see this filter move less and less. So I think about 50 is a good amount here. And we can actually bring up the frequency here. Just hear how that sounds. Okay, so let's go back into the envelope and start playing with these parameters. So we can bring down the sustain. We can shorten the decay. We can give it a bit of release. And you're just listening to see how this sounds. What happens if we lengthen the attack? The start of the note kind of disappears. That pluckiness. Okay, so whenever you're designing sounds, this is primarily where I spend my time, is just playing with these envelopes and trying to get the sound exactly the way I want it. And just really just listening and following my ear. So maybe increasing the decay on the amp envelope would help. Now it's a bit longer, and we can filter it down, shorten the length of the decay on the filter envelope. Now I can start feeling the sub a bit more. That sounds like a nice kind of bass line. Okay, now I want to make some changes to this bass line. I think I want to move these two notes up an octave and just kind of repeat that. So yeah, let's do that. We'll move every other 2 notes, but I don't want to sit here and manually do that over and over again. That takes a long time. So you'll remember we have this loop brace, and we can use that. We can either just shrink it down to this size, and now you'll see these repeat over and over again. Or you can just highlight the notes that you want to loop and hit Ctrl L. Okay, so now this bass line is sounding pretty good. And if you don't have the same exact sounding bass line, just make sure you copy these parameters. Yeah, these numbers. Just note those down. Make sure your frequency is at 67. That the filter is a low pass filter. That this number says 12. If you click on it, it can be 24, which has a different sound. That number basically just refers to the steepness of this curve. If I switch it, you'll see it gets a bit steeper. Okay, so yeah, hopefully you have kind of got an understanding of the envelope, but if you don't worry, we're going to design a few more sounds and we're going to keep using that envelope over and over again. And we're going to just stick to wavetable here. So the next sound I want to make is going to be like a drone sound, kind of like a pad sound. So let's open up wavetable and we're going to make another MIDI clip, Control-Shift-M. And here I just want a note that sticks on A. So make one long note here and just listen to what that sounds like. I'm going to solo this. Now we're going to choose a saw wave again. All right, so let's just think about this sound. I want a sound that feels something like, just to give you an idea, like an atmospheric sound, like something like that, for example. So it's got to be a really long note. We don't want it to be plucky like our bass line. So just think about how the shape should be. Let's think about the attack stage. Do we want an instant attack? What does an instant attack sound like? It's kind of harsh and too sudden. Listen to this. That one's kind of soft. So let's try lengthening the attack a bit. That sounds a bit better. So 125 milliseconds attack. But now what I'm hearing is the note starts off, it gets really loud and then suddenly goes a little quieter. Maybe we don't want that. I think it needs to be pretty consistent. Stay like sort of the same loudness all the way through. So the reason for that is you can see the volume goes down to -6 dB after it reaches its maximum. So let's bring that sustain all the way up. So now we've got the general shape down. It's a really simple shape. Basically just sustain up at maximum. And then the release fades out over 600 milliseconds. That's fine. Not too worried about release because we're basically just going to be holding the note down all the time. All right, so now what do we need to do with the sound? If we listen to something like this, these ones, they don't sound as bright and harsh. And if we have to just look at the shape of this on the EQ, there's all these harmonics up there that are making it really harsh because they're very, very high up. So what we want to do is basically filter them down. So we're just left with a few harmonics. So we can use our synths filter for that. Let's maybe switch it to a steeper curve to 24 and then just turn down this frequency. Okay, so now what I want to do is we want to have more of almost like a smeared sound. This one is too harsh and too centered. We want it to be wide and kind of smeared. So now I'm going to introduce something called unison. Unison is basically we're taking one copy of this waveform and duplicating it a number of times. In this case, you'll see here unison is set to none. We can just set it to classic. And then you see voices and a number. So we can have 3 voices We can go up to 8 voices with this specific synthesizer. And what that's going to do is it's going to make multiple copies of the same sound, but they're going to be slightly offset from each other. And it's going to create this nice wide smeared sound. So let's just listen to how that sounds. I'm going to turn it up. And here the amount is the amount of detuning that happens between the voices. So now they're all perfectly in tune. If we slightly move them out of tune from each other, we start getting this smeared sound. If we take it really far, start sounding just like out of tune. Let's increase the voice numbers. Bring down that amount again. So now we've got a little bit of movement in the sound. You can hear it kind of like pulsating. These are just the waveforms drifting in and out of phase with each other. And again, I don't want to get too deep into phase at the moment. Just know that if you want that smeared sound and you want it to be wide, unison is a great way to achieve that. And to explain that unison a little bit further, I'm going to turn it off again. And what I'm going to do is turn on a second oscillator. And turn that oscillator back to saw wave. And play it again. Now if I turn it off, turn it on, all that's happened is the sound's gotten a little louder. But this is the same as having a unison of 2 with the amount at 0. Here you'll see we have this detune. But I guess it's not really a knob, but yeah. If we start to detune this wave, this specific oscillator, we get the same effect as before, where when we turned up the amount, the wave started kind of pulsating and getting a bit wider. Until it goes out of tune. So you don't need to detune in this case because we're going to be using unison, but I just wanted to illustrate that that's all that's happening is we've got 2 waveforms exactly the same. When you detune them, they start to pulsate. And if you pan those waveforms wide, then like left and right, then you start getting that wide sound. But in this case, let's turn off the oscillator. Let's turn unison back on. Set the voices up to 8, and then start to detune them. Okay, I think we can maybe bring down this 1 octave. So we can either do that in the synth, or we can just do it using this note by highlighting it and holding shift and hitting the down arrow. Now that's a little deeper. And let's start adding some effects to the sound to make it even more atmospheric. Let's take a reverb, and we'll make it a nice big reverb, so long decay on it. Let's hear how it sounds with our bass line. I'm going to just turn it up slowly so you can hear it as it comes in. Okay, and you can experiment with the frequency here to see how bright you want it. We could even use an envelope to modulate this so we don't have to manually do this. Let's try that. Let's grab envelope 2 and let's map that to the filter frequency. See if you can do that without my help. Pause the video, and if you can't figure it out, then I'll show you in a second. Okay, so how do we map it? We click on frequency. We go to the matrix here, and we turn up envelope 2. And now it's mapped to envelope 2 is mapped to the frequency. If we want to go back to envelope 2, we just click over here. Now it jumps back to envelope 2. Now we can start changing that shape. So if we want the sound to fade in really slowly, if we just think about it, which stage of this envelope will control that? Which stage makes the sound go from its quietest to its loudest? It's the attack stage. So what we want to do is just turn up this attack really long. And now we get the sound opening up over time. And we can play with that, make it shorter if we want. And now you hear it dropping down again, and it drops down really quickly. It takes only 600 milliseconds to drop down. So what about a really long decay? Let's make it just as long as the attack. And listen to that. Okay, so let's listen to this. Maybe what we can do is just bring down the amount of modulation so that it doesn't open up as much. Here we go to this frequency amount and just turn that down. Even less, maybe like 20. Let's just have this on loop. Yeah, sounds pretty good. Okay, now I think we need to come up with a sort of lead sound for this. And so we're going to make a new MIDI channel. And we're going to make another MIDI clip. We're also going to open up Wavetable again. We'll stick to Wavetable for the foreseeable future so that we learn it inside and out and super comfortable with it before we start moving on to other synths. Okay, so for the lead sound, I think it would be cool to have something plucky, something energetic. So let's first come up with a melody before we come up with the sound. So I'm going to set this to saw wave again. And actually let's make this, we'll just do some basic sound design first. We'll use this amp envelope just to make it nice and plucky. So let's bring down the sustain really low and the decay nice and short. Then if I click here to arm the track and I play a note on my keyboard, you've got a nice plucky sound. Add some release to it. Okay, let's come up with a melody for this. Okay, I'm going to start down here and I'm just going to, this is all unrehearsed, so I'm just going to try and come up with something. I'm just going to be clicking notes. Like that, and maybe we can just repeat that again in the middle here. So I'm just going to duplicate all of that. And I think we can create a variation on the fourth one again, just like we did in the last song. So let's Let's make 4 repetitions of this. I'm going to highlight all of this and just drag it across to loop it. And now, if you remember, we're using this loop brace, which is saying loop this section over here. And so if I make a change to this last note, for example, it's moving it in 2 places, over here and over here. So we need to make this whole thing not be a loop of 2 of these sections. We need to make the whole thing basically unique. And how we do that is we just consolidate the entire clip. So just click on it and hit Ctrl-J, and it's no longer a loop. We have 4 sets of different notes, and we can manipulate them as we want. Okay, so maybe the last one can go. So I'm hearing that one go up. So that's a bit of a change. Let's listen to this. Yeah, that's quite a cool melody. All right, let's start working more on the sound design of this. So I always like to do this in the context of all the instruments. I don't like to solo a sound and then design it, just because the context of the sound will contribute to all my decisions a lot more and help me design a better sound. Okay, so I want to use the filter just like we did with the bass line. So let's bring down this filter. And I want to shape it a bit more using the filter envelope. So we go and click on envelope 2. And we want to actually go into the matrix and map it first. So we click on matrix. Make sure you've clicked on frequency. And we're going to turn this up. And now we can start shaping the envelope. Let's experiment with unison and see how that sounds. I'm going to turn this on to classic. And let's just bring down the amount. Let's bring it back up. Oh, it's kind of ravey like that. Quite like it, detuned. Let's try moving these, trying different waveforms and see how it sounds. I think I prefer the saw wave. Alright, so that's a basic sound down. Let's add some effects to it. I think some delay would be nice there. Add a delay. We've got quite a lot of space between each repetition of the melody, so we could always fill that with something, and a delay is usually a good option. So I'm just going to bring down the dry wet, bring up the feedback, and then listen to that. Let's make it ping pong. And I want to filter down this delay a bit. Pull this down. Bring up the dry, wet, and the feedback a bit more. It's a bit quiet, so let's turn it up. Let's go to the volume here. Let's also add a little bit of reverb to this. So reverb, the position of the reverb matters, because if you just think about a sound in a normal listening environment, if you the last thing that gets heard is usually the reverb. So the reverb basically is the room. If you are standing inside a room, you shout, it passes through everything it's going to pass before it hits the walls and reverberates through the room. And so typically you want your reverb to come after your delay, so that the little delays are also hitting the walls, so to speak, and it feels more natural. That's not a rule though. You can get creative and put a reverb before delay and come out with like a really cool sound sometimes. So let's just show you how the delay reverb sounds after the delay. And here I'm going to solo it so you can hear it more clearly. So this is without reverb. This is with reverb. We move it to before here. Don't really notice the difference, especially if you're new to this and your ear isn't quite that good yet. But here's where reverb is great to put before delay, is when you have a really short and small reverb. So here we bring the size down really small and the decay really short. Bring up the dry wet. Let's turn up the pre-delay a bit so that the reverb takes a few milliseconds to come in. Let's turn off that delay. So now that reverb sounds really cool. It's really short. It's not super spacey, but it makes the sound just feel a bit bigger. And here I'm going to just turn up this diffuse. That's basically the volume of the reverb. You can also turn up the reflect, which is like the initial sound of the reverb. That makes it feel a bit wider too. And we can try different amounts here, different timings on the reverb, on the delay. What if you just kind of want the melody to repeat? You can set it to 8th, or to 8 over here. And then let's just listen to how that sounds. What if we automate like the frequency here? Start it really low down. Sounds pretty cool. Maybe we can play with these envelopes a bit more to make the sound a bit longer. Let's bring up the sustain on the amp. And let's lengthen the decay here. And also try playing with the filter frequency amount. Here, this time factor basically globally controls all of these numbers that you're seeing here. And it's a great way here on this synth to control and automate the length of everything. So if we, for example, had to do some automations here, we'd get a lot of movement in the sound. I'm just doing some random automations. You can copy me or you can do your own thing. try a different unison, like noise, which adds a bit of like white noise to the sound. That sounds pretty cool. Sometimes more voices sounds better. The delays are getting a bit annoying as I start and stop the sound. We can bring down the feedback a bit on that so that it doesn't happen as many times. Maybe let's try again different numbers here. We can even have different numbers on the left and the right of the delay. So if we just click that, now we can choose 3 on the right and 4 on the left. That means the right's going to be kind of a different rhythm to the left. Okay, I quite like that. I think we can move on from that. All right, let's start adding some drums to this. And I'm going to use a new MIDI channel, so we're just going to click here and tap new MIDI. Let's also rename some of the stuff so we don't get confused. Let's go and make this our bass line. And then this one is our drone. Just call it drone. And this is our lead. Okay. And before we get into the drums, I'm going to pause the video again, take a small break, and I'll see you back here. Feel free to make some drums on your own before following along, but you can always wait for me. It's up to you. Okay, welcome back. It is time to do some drums. Okay, so we made a new MIDI channel, and now we're just going to double click here and add a new MIDI clip. We want to have a kick drum on each quarter note. So we want a note here and another note here on 1.2. And then we've got our loop racer enabled. We can just drag this all the way across. And now we want to find a kick drum. I'm probably just going to go for that same kick that we used before. And now we have a kick drum. The kick drum is kind of not really coming through. We can't hear it very well. So what we need to do is we need to start using some sidechain here. If you remember how to do the sidechain and you practiced it, go ahead and do it yourself. Pause the video. Otherwise, you can just follow along with me. Okay, so we want a compressor. And we're going to expand this here, turn on sidechain. We're going to take the input from our kick drum. We're going to turn this frequency up here. And then we want to bring down the threshold. Until we see this nice sidechain. We're going to bring up the release and make it a little longer. Okay, we can add that sidechain to other elements, maybe to the drone. Let's hear how that sounds. Maybe a bit less. So remember, the ratio controls the amount of the sidechaining that's happening. We can bring down that ratio. And let's also put this onto the lead. Let's Try bringing up the amount here and see how that sounds. Okay, that's a bit too much, so let's bring down the ratio again. Okay, on this lead, I'm thinking that noise is a bit too much. Let's bring down the amount. Yeah, I like it a bit cleaner like that. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. Let's start adding some hi-hats to this. And I think I'm going to do the 16th hi-hat first. So new MIDI channel. And we're going to double click again. And if you remember, we're going to be placing a note on each 16th, just like we did before. And we're going to just loop 4 of those notes. So turn on the loop brace and loop those 4. Now we want to grab a hi-hat. So let's just go into my gentle hats here. And I'm just looking for something that's kind of got a little bit of weight to it, and it's got some nice high end on it. I know that when you start out producing, most of these hi-hats just sound like the same thing, and you don't know which one is the better one and how to choose them. And I know that can be really frustrating, but I just want to tell you, like, promise you, the more you do this, the more you'll start realizing, oh, this one works better than that one, and you'll start making a kind of mental note of all the ones that you really like. And over time, you just get better and better at this process of sound selection. So if you feel like you have a question for me and you want to know, like, how do I choose the right hi-hat, there is no real answer for that. It's just about developing your ear and learning what sounds good in context. So just keep on writing music and it'll come. So let's just try that one. Double click on it. I'm just going to bring this all the way across. And now I'm going to maybe just try a few different ones. I liked, is it this one or that one? This one maybe? Yeah, I think that's my favorite. Let's turn it up a bit. And we're going to add a little bit of bounce to this. So if you remember how we did that last time, we turned down the velocity of these first 2 notes. And we also turned down the last one a little bit. And then maybe spread out the movement of them a bit. Here under controls, we have some random panning we can do. Exaggerated. So let's just bring that down a bit to like, maybe like 16%. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to a little something new here inside of the sampler. So remember I said we're going to spend a lot of time in the sampler, and we've been using envelopes a lot. So here you'll see there's an attack, decay, sustain, and release inside of the sampler. And that is just going to be controlling, just like in the synth, the volume over time. At the moment, the sustain is all the way up, so this hat just plays as normal. But we can bring down the sustain to 0, and now we're creating that kind of plucky shape with a long decay of 600 milliseconds. What happens if we shorten that? Let's listen to it. We get a really tight, short clicky sound, lengthen it, it opens up. Same thing with the attack. Can make it a bit softer, and a bit sharper. So let's just play this in the track and kind of shape the sound, get used to using these envelopes. Quite like it with a bit of a soft attack like that. Let's try shorten the decay. I think a slightly longer decay is nice. Okay, let's make another hi-hat. So I'm going to use an open one this time. Maybe that one. Let's try that one. A double click here. And we just want it on the offbeat, which is the note between the quarter notes, which is 1 and 1.2. So now we place a note in the middle of them. And we're just going to duplicate that all the way across. It's a bit quiet. The velocities are quite low. Let's turn those up. So here you can see, if you watch this little playhead as it moves through every time the note plays, it kind of ends around here. And that's because the note ends and the release is really short. So we can open up that release. We'll go all the way to the end and we'll get the full sound. It's not illustrated really well in this case. A longer hi-hat might show that bit better. Sound. Let's grab a 909 hi-hat. Open. Just searching that. Okay, now you'll see. Can you hear how the sound kind of like cuts off? And if we open up that release, it gets smoother and kind of has a longer tail. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's just kind of go by feel. I like a bit of release in it. Now let's try and shape the sustain. We'll bring down the sustain a bit. And now we can shape the sound using the decay a bit more. Yeah, I like that. We add a clap to this. Let's grab let's use just a standard 808. A lot of the drum sounds in electronic music come from 808s, 909s, 707, 606, all of these drum machines, these Roland drum machines that were used heavily in pretty much all the dance music records in the hardware days before computers came around and took over. So you'll recognize a lot of the sounds that sound very familiar. So if I just search for an 808 clap and the drum hits, you'll hear this one and be like, oh yes, I've heard that clap a million times. So it can be good to use them. It's usually a safe bet if you don't really trust your ears. We can add a little bit of delay to this to maybe make it a little bit wider. Delay. And let's make it a really short delay, like 60 milliseconds or something. Ping pong and short feedback. shorter time. Yeah, that sounds cool. One thing I like to try with my claps is to always just scrub through the sample and see if it sounds better to start the sample a little bit later. That sounds cool. Actually quite like it there. Let's settle for that. Sometimes it can be nice to layer in a snare with your clap. Let's grab a 909 snare. And go back to the drums. Just grab the first one. I'm going to duplicate this channel, and here we're doing a bit of layering. I'm going to turn off the delay. And now we have that snare in there just to hear how it sounds without the clap. Okay, so what I want from the snare is this nice little bump that you hear in the low range. And just to solo it so you can hear it, I'm going to just low pass it. I'm talking about that sound. That's going to add a bit of weight to our clap. So let's turn this back on, and then I'm going to put them together. And what I want from the snare is, remember, just that bump. So we can either take out the high end from the snare and get that bump, or we can shorten the snare using the envelope. So how do we do that? Bring the sustain all the way down, shorten the decay. And I quite like the sound of that. And let's just hear it in the mix. If I turn off the snare, turn it back on. It's a very subtle difference, but trust me, it is helping out. And we can use these snares to make like little ghost hits, maybe between the claps. So what happens if we make this entire thing unique by consolidating it like this? Now we can start adding some extra snares in. So let's do something like let's add another snare here. Oh, it's a bit quiet. Let's make it a little longer. Bump there. Let's actually add an extra clap to mirror this. I'm going to duplicate this just up here. And I don't like the rhythm of that. I want to move across a bit more. Same as this one. Let's move it 1/16 across. And let's repeat this twice. So I'm going to loop this whole section. I've highlighted both of these. So now we can actually control both of them at the same time. We can turn on loop and just highlight all of these notes and just loop that. Oh, you can bring down the loop braces of both of them. And I'm thinking it might be cool to add a bit more variation to these claps by having big reverb on the last hit over here. let's do that. So what I'm going to do here is take a reverb, and I'm going to just put it on our clap, and I'm going to just solo the clap so we can hear it, and I'm going to increase the decay quite a lot, like 10 seconds. Okay, so now what we want is we only want to hear this reverb on one of the hits. And the problem is, well, we can automate this dry wet like this, so that the reverb only comes in briefly and then it goes away again. But then the reverb doesn't sound very natural. Listen to this when it comes back around. It kind of cuts off. And if we don't cut it off, then it's just going to, all these other hits are going to have reverb on them too, which doesn't sound nice either. Oh, in this case it also cut off. But there's another way we can apply reverb, and so I'm going to introduce another little thing, and that's called your send. Sends and returns. And so what this does is we can use these little channels down here to basically send our audio signal from any channel to this one, and then manipulate it separately in parallel to this one. So let me take our reverb. I'm going to just delete that automation. I'm going to cut it off this channel, and I'm going to paste it onto this one. And now, if I turn this all the way up to 100%, and now I can send this clap signal down to this reverb and control it independently. This might be a little bit confusing, so just bear with me. This little control here tells us that we want to send the signal down to A. This one says send it down to B. A has a reverb on it, B has a delay. So if we just listen to this, I start to send it to the reverb. We now just get that sound coming into the reverb, and as we turn it down, it disappears from the reverb. If I send it to B, which has got a delay on it, now we get a delay. All right, so what do I want to do? I want to briefly send it to that reverb just for one hit, so we'll just automate that. You can remember to automate anything. You just basically tweak it up and down like this, and it'll appear on this line. And now I can just turn that up to 100% briefly, and then turn it down again. And now we should get a more natural fade out of the reverb. And that's kind of like a nice little drum fill at the end, or fills the place of a drum fill. So let's just listen to this full sequence. Okay, so we've effectively got enough here to start arranging a full track. And maybe while we're arranging it, we'll start adding some other elements, some little ear candy elements. But I think there's definitely enough here now. So I'm going to pause the video, take a short break, and then I'm going to come back and arrange what we have. See you in a moment.